Hello, guys. Welcome to week 2 of Fighting Illini Live. We survived. We made it all the way to week 2, guys. So happy to be back. This, of course, is brought to you by the Voice of College Football Network. Get your business, product, service, or personal brand to the next level by partnering with the Voice of College Football. Let's discuss how you can reach the target market. Check out the experience of one of our current partners posted on the screen. We are here to deliver for you. Contact us at sponsorships@vocfb.com today. That is sponsorships@vocfb.com. All right, guys, I'm excited to be back. I feel like most podcasts don't make it to week 2, even though this is sort of a podcast. I'd say it's a podcast, but we're here. Week 2, so excited. We have a whole 3 of you here watching live. Thank you so much, all 3 of you. Thank you, Maddie, again, always with a shout out. Really excited to be back. Before we get into anything else, in terms of Illini football news, Pat Bryant will be performing. That's not the right word. Participating in the NFL Combine. I think that's the right word. He'll be participating in the NFL Combine. That will be on NFL Network. That will be broadcast there Sunday at noon. I got that via the Illinois football Instagram this morning. They posted that. So do look out for Pat Bryant if you want to watch him go at it at the NFL Combine, noon Central Time on NFL Networks. Make sure to check that out. Well, all right, guys. That's really all I have for today's intro. We can get right into it. We can skip all the who am I stuff this time and just get right into some solid content. So why don't we do it? I want to circle back to last episode. If you guys were with me last week, you remember I was kind of running out of time at the end of the episode. I really got into the schedule predictions, and I didn't get to go too in depth on the second half of the schedule. So we're gonna revisit that because come on, we love predicting schedules. That's the most fun thing we can do in the off season is just predict what's going to happen. That's why I'm here every week. So I want to kind of recap the schedule predictions from last week, and I want to get more in depth, especially about the second half of the schedule, because I really had to rush through that. I was just like, Washington win, bye guys. So let's get more in detail this time. So if you remember, or if you are new to the channel week 2, welcome. Last week I did a cold prediction of Illinois' schedule for 2025. Overall, I hate to say easy, especially when you're in a conference like the Big Ten. But, I mean, compared to with Illinois' skill set and the opponents they have coming up in 2025, it's a pretty easy schedule overall in terms of win percentage, things like that. It doesn't look too bad. There are a couple of key games that, especially in a schedule like this, are really going to define them. So, if you remember, I had them going 10-2. That was my prediction. That is a game better than last year. Their only losses I had was at Ohio State. That one I'll go in depth on a little bit. I don't think I have to too much though. That's a national champion, guys. Come on. And then I picked USC as their other loss, and I'm here to tell you that was a cold react, right? So this week I wanted to kind of look into it a little more, do more research this time, see if I changed my mind about anything. And guys, I think I'm sticking with my initial reactions here. I still am saying that they only have 2 losses. The more controversial one being the USC loss. So I wanted to get a little more into that, do some more research for you guys instead of just seeing that and going, oh, trap game. I mean, I think it is a trap game. It's easy to throw around the term trap games. There's certainly a lot of games on here that could be trap games. I saw a lot of other people calling some other games like Purdue, Washington, Rutgers, all those trap games as well. I mean, it happens, especially in a strange Big Ten where you got to travel to the West Coast half the time, or if you're a West Coast team, travel East Coast, things like that. It's a weird era of college football, right? Because geography is kind of out the window, just super conferences, things like that. But I'll get into that later about how I think the travel will affect Illinois' schedule. But USC, in this part of their schedule, they kind of have a weird back and forth going on here They are at home week 2. Then they are at Purdue week 3. Then they are back at home week 4 for Michigan State. And then they are at Illinois week 5. Then Michigan. I won't bore you too much with the USC details because we're not here for USC. But all you need to know really is that they're going back and forth between Central/East Coast area and then home. It's kind of odd. And I feel like USC, Oregon, Washington, UCLA, I feel like when we talk about travel in regards to these teams' schedules, I don't think travel's as big of an issue for them actually because they're used to doing that. You guys know what I mean? Like Illinois, they had a one game last year, right? They traveled to Oregon for one game. This year, they have one game out on the West Coast, right? It makes a bigger difference for a team like Illinois who's only going out there once a year. Right, then you get some jet lag in there. You're not used to that. USC is just going to be flying back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And by the time they play Illinois, I don't think travel will affect them as much as you would think. So that's a big reason. I did also look into it. I don't know if you guys remember when I was talking about the homecoming game. I was a little confused as to the homecoming game was I almost said Central Michigan. That was last year's homecoming game. Western Michigan. I was a little confused if it was Western Michigan or if it was the USC game. It is the USC game, actually. However, that still does not change my opinion, but should be a little bigger crowd for that one than the Western Michigan game. I like that the homecoming game's a Big Ten game. I didn't really like that they did against Central Michigan last year because I felt like that was more done to get an easy win out of that. You guys know what I mean? After that Wisconsin homecoming loss the year prior. So that hasn't really changed my opinion. But again, obviously this is a winnable game. And that's a good what's the word I'm looking for here? Like that's a good sign at least, though. Obviously, I hope they win that game. Obviously, they can win that game. And that's a reason I think that they might. But just, it being the homecoming game, that's not exactly enough to push me over the edge, go, oh my God, well, hold the phone. You know what I mean, guys. I also feel like USC, like out of all the games that you could look at their schedule, trap game, I think USC has the most potential out of all those teams. I know they had a down year last year. They kind of got gutted by the transfer portal, and they're doing okay in the transfer portal this year. Like they'll probably be I think they'll improve, not by a ton. We're still probably looking at same skill level for the majority of the teams in the Big Ten, right? However, USC did biggest news of the offseason for them. They flipped 2026 QB Jonas Williams. He's one of the top QBs in the 2026 class. He was going to go to Oregon, and they flipped him. That's really tough to do in the conference, especially a team who went undefeated in the conference last year. Obviously, Lincoln Riley, USC, had some great pitch to him. Obviously, him and a lot of other recruits, because they have the #1 recruiting class right now for the class of 2026, think that USC has got something going on. I think they have some momentum, right? So does the 2026 recruiting class affect the 2025 season, however? I would argue yes. I would argue that even though those players aren't going to be there, those players are going to be on the sidelines for some games. Jonas Williams will be on the sidelines for some games. And that's exciting. When you have the #1 recruiting class in 2026 coming in, we'll see if that stays there, of course. But that adds some momentum to your program, whether those players are playing or not. You know what I'm saying? I think it can be a very good debate if that actually has any value for the team playing before that recruiting class comes in. But USC has got some momentum right now. And I think knowing that recruiting class will come in, that affects the coaching staff. That affects how USC is viewed as well by their opponents and how they view themselves. USC also played some tough games last year against some good teams. They lost to Penn State by 3. Well, I think I mentioned that last week, but they lost to Penn State by 3. They dropped 35 on Notre Dame. This team absolutely has upset potential, right? And if we're looking at, I predicted they'd beat Indiana. So if we're looking at the 4-0 Illinois team that just beat Indiana at that point in the season, Illinois is going to have a bigger target on their backs than we're used to having. You know what I mean? So USC definitely has some upset potential. They didn't quite happen this year, but they're definitely contenders. They got a lot of momentum going on. The biggest reason why I think this is the biggest trap game, though, out of all their games coming up this season is because of the Indiana game the week before. I know they play Ohio State, but I think the Indiana game is that's key, just because you feel like you're closer to Indiana's level. You know, the reason I don't think Illinois is going to win at Ohio State is that I think this Illinois team is great. This might be the best Illinois team we've seen since the 2008 Rose Bowl. However, I'm just not convinced that they're quite at national championship caliber yet, you know? I think they need some more like offensive superstars. Like they need another Pat Bryant. Someone to come in, but they need some superstars at many different positions. I think they can certainly compete with Ohio State. I do not think that game will be a blowout. However, I'm just not quite sure that this team is on that championship level yet. I think they're playoff level. I think they can beat Indiana. I just don't see it yet. Obviously, I'm rooting for it, and I would love for them to prove me wrong, right? I would love to give me some early warning signs that, hey, this team is on a whole different level. I already think they are, but championship level, national championship level, that's just something I think I need a little more convincing to see. But no one would be happier than me to see that, other than probably the team, you know. But that's why I think the OSU game's a loss. So that leads me into looking at Indiana as the big game, not only because Indiana and Illinois are more at that same level, which is a really, really good level of football, right? There's a lot of attention on that game, but also the Illinois-Indiana rivalry is just a little bigger, you know, because Illinois has not had the tools to compete with Ohio State for a while, right? This might be the first time that I feel like they can go into Ohio State and keep it within a score the whole time, you know? That confidence is not really normal for Illinois fans. And we love to have it, but I just think Indiana's more on like that next tier, like just right below national championship level. And then just the Illinois-Indiana rivalry. It mainly goes through basketball. These teams haven't had the greatest football history overall, especially in the past 25 plus years, right? Since the turn of millennia. But so that's mainly a rivalry rooted in basketball, but that carries over. I think the Illinois-Indiana rivalry is just hitting at the right time for both these teams. Both these teams had their best year in a long time, especially Indiana. And with all the pressure on that game, I just think that Indiana game will overshadow any other game more than the Ohio State game will be. I feel like if Illinois goes into Ohio State, they lose to Ohio State, I don't think anyone is shocked, right? If they get blown out, I might be a little upset about that. You guys are going to hear about that. But there's certain expectations attached to the Indiana game that don't really exist in the Ohio State game. You know what I mean? A loss at Ohio State isn't as big of a deal as a loss at Indiana, right? Because if we have a loss at Indiana, okay, now we're looking at this team as a team that needs to basically do what Indiana did last year and just blow everybody out, since they don't really have any other opportunities against ranked teams. The only two teams that were ranked at the end of last year that they play this year are Indiana and Ohio State. And that Ohio State one is going to be really tough, guys. So that's my opinion on it. That's why I think the USC game is a trap game. USC's got a lot of momentum. The Indiana game's the biggest game of the year. It's going to be overshadowed by that. So I hope I've gone in depth enough about that. I think that deserves a proper explanation, because I'm sure a lot of you guys were like, USC, after I just predicted them to beat Indiana. But beating Indiana and then losing to USC the next week is just the most Illinois football thing like I can think of, right? Like if you guys have been fans of the team for a long time, you know what I'm talking about. But again, that's changing. That really is changing. But yeah, other than that, just vibes about USC. Like I just got a bad feeling in my gut about that one. I think if they beat Indiana, their chances to beat USC are significantly lowered. I think if they lose to Indiana, then I think they'll win that USC game. But as me predicting that they'll win at Indiana, that's the biggest trap game I see. There are some other possible trap games, right? We got at Washington, and we have home against Rutgers the very next week. This at Washington game, by the way, comes after OSU. So it's OSU week 7, and then at Washington week 8. Home against Rutgers is week 9. And Washington and Rutgers, those can certainly be looked at as trap games for travel reasons, of course. But I already kind of went into how I think, like, the only reason I am worried about Washington is for travel, right? And is that a fair reason to think a team is going to lose a game? A very, very capable Illinois team? I just don't think that's enough reason. But we'd be silly to overlook it. I do think that travel affects Illinois and these other teams more than it would USC coming to Illinois. You know what I'm saying? Because those four teams out on the West Coast are coming to the Midwest, East Coast a lot. Illinois only got one game out there. At Washington's their only game out on the West Coast because 4 of the 18 teams are out there. The other 14 are in the Midwest and a couple on the East Coast. So I just think travel won't quite get to those teams the same way because they're so used to it. USC's traveling out east 4 times this year. Illinois is doing that once. So I don't want to just say it's different and leave it at that. But like, you know what I'm guys saying? Like you're more used to it. I'll stop worrying about the travel too much because I don't think they're going to lose at Washington. That is a reason to watch that, though. But I just don't think travel would be the only only reason they would have to lose that game. You know what I'm saying? So that's why I am predicting a win there. That just isn't enough for me. The Rutgers game after Washington, I think, is more of a trap game. But if I'm predicting this as a team that's already lost at home to USC, I don't think they're going to lose another home game. So and plus Rutgers, just when comparing Rutgers' incoming roster to USC's, I just don't quite see the same firepower. Like Rutgers hasn't really picked up anyone in the transfer portal. USC has got this kind of momentum swagger that they're picking up, I think in large part due to their 2026 class, right? They've been getting some nice transfers. I just don't really see that with Rutgers. And so that's why when those were probably the 2 most trap game worthy. And I think coming off playing that big game at Indiana is going to trump any effects from coming back from Washington. You guys know what I mean? The Purdue game, I think it was Jackson Johnson who mentioned in the comments last year that the Purdue game could be a possible trap. And you're right. It's at Purdue. I think that is, let me just double check when that game is. That's after the USC game. So that's kind of in between their homecoming at USC and Ohio State. Just a random road game in there. And that's fair. But again, this is a Purdue team that went 0-9 in the Big Ten last year. And this is a Purdue team that took Illinois to the wire at Illinois last year, right? You guys remember that 50-49 wild overtime game? I could not believe that game. I couldn't watch that game. I was getting updates about it. I didn't think I'd have to watch that game. I didn't think that would be a problem. I'm just constantly getting these updates. I'm like, oh my God, how is Purdue keep scoring? How do they blow this lead? I think with all the drama of this year's Purdue game, I think this year at Purdue is going to be okay, especially if they do lose that USC game the week before. They are going to be standing on business. You know what I'm saying? So I think just because I think memory will be a huge motivation there, honestly. Motivated by memory is what I wrote in my notes. And I think that's absolutely accurate. I think this Illinois team, I just think they can crush Purdue because of what happened last year. You know, if they didn't have a recent scare, I absolutely would highlight that as a trap game. And we also don't know a lot about Purdue's incoming team. They went 0-9 in the Big Ten last year. They got a new incoming coach. So I just don't see it because of their game last year. Overall, I think this team has a lot of high playoff potential. I've been basically saying that for almost 40 minutes now, if you take last episode too, looking at their schedule. But this really high playoff potential, right? To be this year's Indiana, a team that doesn't have that tough of a schedule, but you're still in the Big Ten, right? They got to take care of business because Indiana didn't just squeak by some of these lower in the standings Big Ten teams. You know, they crushed some of these teams, right? And I think Illinois needs to do that, especially with all these home games towards the end of the year. And then some of these road games like at Purdue, at Wisconsin, just crush them. Give the committee no choice but to put you into the college football playoff. I think they have to beat Indiana and they have to beat Duke. That's the week 2 game. That's their biggest of their 3 non-conference games. They have to win at Duke and at Indiana and just crush all the other teams, where even if you do lose that USC game 10-2, I think this team very much can get into the playoffs with that record if those are the wins they have, right? I think a loss at Indiana and then a win at home against USC the following week, I think that arguably looks worse for your playoff case. And that's probably going to be a little controversial. You guys can certainly debate me on that. But I think the Indiana game's a bigger win, and that's a ranked win. You know, their only other opportunity, unless something drastic changes in the preseason rankings with Duke or something, or maybe some other Big Ten team catches fire. But teams that were ranked at the end of last season, it is only Indiana and Ohio State. And at Ohio State, it's going to be really tough to win. So I think they need to grab that Indiana game, and they need to get that Duke win on the road because that's really their only test outside of the conference. I'm not worried about Western Illinois, right? Western Michigan is not bad, but I'm not super worried about them because they blew out Illinois a few years ago as well. And I think kind of same motivated by memory deal that I predicted with the Purdue game. So that's what I'm thinking about the schedule, guys. I've gotten a lot more in depth, but we'll leave the schedule be for now, right? Until we get some updates, maybe until we get some game times. I would love to see some game times. That Indiana game better be a night game, I swear. So let's get into some recent headlines. This is something I actually pulled for last week. Didn't get to it because I just yapped about the schedule. And look at that, I did it again. But there's been some speculation about the new college football playoff format. And the Big Ten commissioner and the SEC commissioner, that is Tony Petitti for the Big Ten and Greg Sankey for the SEC, they've kind of been leading these talks in meetings recently about changing the seeding in the college football playoff and also some expansion. So let's talk about seeding first. That kind of came out last week. They want to make it so that the top 4 conference winners no longer automatically get those valuable top 4 spots where you get a first round bye, right? And I agree with that, actually. I agree with that. My main reasoning is in year 1, I think that was the biggest issue college football playoff had, is that all the top 4 teams not only lost their games, but were also underdogs heading into those games. It's not like there was some crazy upset or anything. Every single lower team was favored in those bowl games against the 1 through 4. And obviously you had, Georgia was kind of hindered by a Carson Beck injury. So it's not super fair because Georgia and Oregon absolutely deserve the 1 and 2, right? Boise State, Arizona State are fantastic teams. Should Boise State have been seated ahead of Penn State after how we saw them play? I don't think so. I think we can give guaranteed spots to top 5 conference winners, I would say, which I think they're already doing that, and then just adding in that the top 4 of those get the top 4 seeds. I think winning your conference, not every conference like March Madness is, but winning your conference in one best group of 5 team, and then take the Big 12, ACC, Big 10, SEC automatic qualifiers for winning those conferences, right? But I think taking that, not giving you a seed based off whether you're the conference winner or not, doesn't necessarily take away from conference play, right? They do that in the NFL too, right? Where the 4 division winners automatically get the top 4 seeds. We see that in the NFL. We've seen that for years. I like that because it adds value to your division opponents. But I don't think you need that in college football when you're playing 8 of your 12 games, or in Illinois in the Big Ten's case, 9 of your 12 games are being played against your conference. You know, the value of your conference is already there when you're playing that many games against them. In the NFL, you're playing 6 of your 17 games against your division. Still certainly a good chunk of the schedule, but not 3/4 of it like it is in the Big Ten. You know what I'm saying? So I don't think that takes away from that. And also the era of super conferences, I think, is not going in a great direction. I really don't like the era of super conferences just in general. It's certainly interesting. It makes for some good matchups we don't normally see. But I think that's kind of ruined this plan, you know, because this 12-team playoff was in development for years. This has been development before we saw these West Coast Big Ten teams, before we saw West Coast ACC teams, before we saw conferences stretching the entire country. And so I think, who knows in 10 years if there will even be 4 to 5 conferences, you know? Based on how these talks are going, the Big Ten and the SEC are just bullying these other conferences, and rightfully so. They have a lot of power. Those 2 conferences hold the cards. It really could just be Big Ten, SEC become like conferences like we see in professional sports, you know? So yeah, overall, I do support reseeding. And I also think reseeding, along with no longer having home games in the first round, I think home games are really exciting. However, I don't see, like, all those teams got crushed. You know, I think the closest game was Indiana lost by 14 points, and they were down by more than that earlier in the game. There is no bigger home field advantage than in college football. There's no question about that, right? I don't think anyone's going to debate me on that. That is the best, loudest atmosphere in sports. And it's really tough to win as a road team, especially in a playoff atmosphere. You know, I think that's the reason why all 4 of those visiting teams got crushed in the opening round. I would love to see the whole college football playoff be neutral site games, in addition to reseeding, right? So that if we went back and used the new reseeding rules to last year's college football playoff, it doesn't change what teams made the college football playoff, right? It's just changing who's playing who, giving some teams like Texas, teams who just, you know, because they're in a better conference, can't get that bye. I don't think that's really fair. I think we should reward teams for tougher competition. And then real quick, they also talked about expansion. Also, Big Ten SEC commissioners talking about expansion with college football playoff as early as 2026. So for sure this year we're getting another 12-team playoff, and it could be over after 2 years. But okay, real quick, they want to expand a 14 to 16 team playoff, and would give 4 automatic bids to both the Big Ten and the SEC. Shocking that the Big Ten and SEC commissioners would suggest getting 4 automatic bids in a 14 to 16. I like 16 a little better, I think. Playoff, right? But And then the ACC and Big 12 would each get 2. Group of 5 conferences would get 1, like just the best group of 5 conference team. And then there would be 1 if it was 14 teams, or 3 if there's 16 teams, automatic bids. I don't agree with that. I think they should let the 12-team college football playoff have its time like it did, like the 4-team college playoff did. Sorry, it got a nice decade. We got used to the 14 college football playoff, and I love the 12-team college football playoff. I think a 16-team college football playoff is very realistic, but I think they should give it some time, and I don't think they should expand beyond 16 teams, because if we expand all the way to 16 teams just 2 years after expanding to 12, you're just always going to get cries for more expansion, right? We've seen that in March Madness. People are trying to suggest expanding March Madness next year to 76 teams. We already have 68 teams, and people are still talking about expansion, right? But it's different in football. I think in football, you got some teams playing 4 postseason games. I mean, that's a third of your schedule that you're adding on extra to your season, where most people are just playing in 1 bowl game, or some teams nothing. So those are my thoughts. I think the expansion should hold off. I love the reseeding. And with that, that is all I have for you guys. This week, we got into just 2 topics today, but 2 really, really good topics. Please let me know your thoughts on Illinois' schedule, what you think some trap games are, and also let me know about some of those college football playoff debates. Thank you so much for being here week 2. I love y'all. I'll be back next Wednesday, 7 p.m. to talk some more Illini. Thank you, guys. Make sure to like and subscribe. ILL.